Welcome folks! This video will show one of my previous builds of the Adirondack Chair based on King's woodworking design. The template shown here is one I ordered from him directly. As with all paper templates, I started out by cutting each piece out. Here, I'm using my wife's expensive sewing scissors. I don't know why I'm using them, as they seem to be getting pretty dull in my shop. Maybe it's time for me to invest in some sharpening stones for my her scissors. Yeah. Once the scissors have been properly dulled, I'll just chunk those to the side and switch to using an X-Acto knife. Alternatively, if you go this route, you can use any razor that you might feel comfortable with. After what felt like hours of tracing out templates, I had some pent-up frustration I decided to take out on this overhead light. Ah, that feels better. Once I've laid out my 2x12s, I begin inspecting them for any nails or staples that the lumberyard might have hid for me. Nothing like a couple staples to make you question your own strength. Still trying. I'll get it any day now. Great job, champ. Once that's completed, I'll begin my layout with the templates. As this is regular Douglas fir, I'm not too concerned with grain patterns or sapwood. I'm primarily looking to minimize as much waste as possible and get as many pieces onto each board. I trace the templates onto the boards and also mark the sections so I can cut them into more workable pieces. As you can see, the DeWalt miter saw's dust collection is truly amazing. It allows all the dust to collect on the floor and in my lungs. The next order of business is to make the wood templates for routing. It's a fairly simple process. Trace out the template, cut the template out, and then sand it down to where you want it. One tip, if you're going to make these chairs in any kind of large quantity, or any, I'd say more than 2, you'll want to make at least 13 of the back chair slats, as this makes shaping them very much quicker. Although, it should be noted, this is a deviation from the original plans. In King's woodworking video, he rough cuts and then sands them into shape with a belt sander. An important note when you're trim routing, you want to cut and trim as close to your initial line as possible, only leaving about a 32nd to a 16th. This is especially true if you're going to do any end grain, as that can cause kickback and tear out pretty substantially. With some of these pieces, I went a little bit too heavy, and I did have a bit of tear out and kickback. Additionally, you always, when using a router table, want to use paddles. Anytime your hand gets near the blade, you do not want your hand sucked into the blade at that time. Next up is everyone's favorite activity, sanding. Not much to be said, just work through the grits. Here I only sanded up to 220. Not much point with Douglas fir going beyond that. This is especially true with these chairs, especially if you're making multiples or more than one. There can be quite a few parts to work through, so no need in overdoing it. Just have to put on some good music or a podcast, get through it. Through the course of sanding, I realized I'll need a place to sit. I had forgotten to cut out the slats earlier, so I'll just rip them down with my table saw. Once I have all the pieces cut, I'll add a slight round over to the top of all the slats. Once all the pieces are cut, shaped, and sanded, I'll apply a light coat of a deck stain. Once that's dry, we can begin the assembly process, attaching the back legs to the front brace. Want to find a way to clamp or secure the leg to the brace. Here I just use the pipe clamp. Once that's secured, I'll then countersink and drill 2 screws in each leg. Once both legs are secured, then we'll begin to attach the back cradle assembly to the back legs. It should be noted throughout this whole process, anytime screws are used, it's always pre-drill, countersink, and then screw. Probably won't show that throughout the whole process, but everything that is screwed in receives that process in this build. For the front legs, I just need to prop up the rear leg assembly by lifting the front brace. A simple T-shaped jig works well for this. You just want to make sure also the front legs are square before screwing and bolting them to the rear leg assembly. A little detail I like is to paint the bolt heads. Although if it looks like I'm holding the bolts kind of funny here, it's because the paint was still wet. Another point to note is you got to be careful because there's the 2 screws that go in through the front brace to the rear leg, so you have to miss those with the bolts. In addition to, once we get to the point of attaching the slats to the top, they'll go straight down. So either you might need to use a shorter screw there, or put your bolts a little bit lower. Here I'm putting some double stick tape on just a scrap piece of plywood. This will act like a rest as we start to attach our rear slats. With the scrap piece of plywood attached, and my frame is simply secure, I can begin attaching the back slats. I start on one side, and then I attach the one on the opposite side, followed by one directly in the middle. This helps me ensure I get even spacing between all of the back slats. Once again, with all these, same procedure, pre-drill, countersink, then attach the screw. Using a simple spacer jig, I begin attaching the armrest to the front legs. Once it's positioned where I like it, I attach 2 screws down through the top into the front leg, securing the armrest. With all the slats attached to the bottom and the armrest now mounted, I can attach the back middle cradle. I temporarily secure it with clamps and then force it into place and get it even in parallel. I then add a couple bolts to the back just to make sure it doesn't ever go anywhere. With the back cradle attached, I begin to space out the slats to make sure they stay uniform. This is especially important, especially as some time goes by in your build. They can move and bow a little bit. Here, I'm using a screw just to indent the wood. One day I'll eventually invest in some brad point nails, but that won't be today. Also, you might notice I'm using a laser level here. In truth, it really didn't work out as well as I had hoped. You'll notice I use the same procedure here. I start on one side, the middle, and then the other side, and then I'll go back through and attach all the others, ensuring the spacing is even. So this was one of the first times I built these chairs. As such, I've since changed how I attach the upper cradle in the back. Here I go in through the front. Now I pre-drill in through the back and attach them to where you do not see any screws in the front. Alright, we're in the home stretch now. One of the last things to do is to attach the seat. I'll begin by laying out the slats with spacers, and then I'll scribe a line underneath with a pencil so as to get my cut lines. With my cut lines marked, I can go over to the miter saw and trim all the slats down to length. One note, if you did pre-finish, you'll want to just use a little bit of finish there on the ends and also route the very end. Once everything's cut to length, I can then put it back in the order it was in and then follow the same screwing procedure. I just want to be mindful once you get towards the front. As mentioned before, there is those bolts, so you might have to angle the screws or use a shorter screw depending on the depth of the bolt. And with that, we have a completed Adirondack chair. I must say this is one of the most comfortable deck chairs I've ever sat in. If you like the look of the chair, I highly recommend checking out King's Woodworking channel. He has detailed plans and more in-depth build descriptions if you like to build it the way he does. And if you made it this far, I just want to thank you. And if you would please like and subscribe. Until next time.